Good morning.
Good
Afternoon.
morning.
Good day.
Hello.
Raining.
It's good to be back. Good to be back again, isn't it? After the excitement of yesterday and the visit by the bishop.
We did have a rather jolly day yesterday.
We did.
Including Chris, who got to see the bishop more than once.
Yeah, he had more than his fair share.
What can I say?
And he was creeping as well, buying him
Wild
sausage.
boar sausages and cooking them up, making him a sandwich with homemade bread.
He's not going to live that down with any ease, I tell you. The rest of the chapter.
Well, I think you remember it a bit more than a sandwich from Co-op.
It's outrageous. That's what the instructions were. Something simple.
Something simple, exactly. And yet,
instructions.
I'm
so lonely. I don't receive instructions like that.
Except one of our number, betrayed us, and
actually, I was doing some super creeping too, because we were discussing making packed lunches, and I said to him, "Do you still have children at home?"
Yeah.
And he went, "I love that you think I look young enough to still have children at home."
Oh, that's just to blow you out the park one, isn't it?
I thought he did. I mean, he was very youthful looking. I've no idea how old he is. Mid-50s? I don't know. Anyway.
58. 59 is the answer.
Oh, okay, so it's less likely he'd have children. So.
I've baptised a baby with a 52-year-old parent.
Wow. I have to say hats off to anybody who becomes a parent in their 50s or 60s or 70s. Which people do, I know, but gosh, I think parenting is a young
grandparents. You can
game.
give them back, can't you?
Yeah.
You have a couple of days, give them back, and then spend a few days recovering.
Well, it's funny. I was chatting only this week to a member of our communities who's just had their grandson for 4 days, and she said it's quite tiring. Oh, quite happy to give him back this week. Yes. There we are. Or you live near enough your grandchildren, you never have to
say hello to the bishop.
We did. We had a lovely time. Dave was on the phone.
Apologies to any dear viewer who would like to have seen the bishop. Unfortunately, it wasn't possible.
No, he only had 4 hours in the deanery, which isn't very long. And he went and saw, he prioritised young people, which I think is probably a good plan. There we are. Anyway, it was nice to meet him. I feel like, it's always nice to clap ties on your bishop. That sounds rude. David, you're still muted. Oh, okay, fine. Are you staying like that? The dog barking? No.
No, he's on the phone.
Phone ringing.
It's a message.
He's listening. No.
Oh, my computer's moving.
Something else happening.
The dog's wriggling on my lap.
I have no control because my wife has taken the phone from the study with the silence button on it, and she hasn't pressed the do not disturb button. So every time he rings, it's ringing still on the machine.
Excellent. Oh well. So today we have a large chunk of John. Basically, that's been the whole of Lent, hasn't it?
Yeah.
The best part of a chapter of John each week.
Yeah.
Been good though. I've enjoyed it. I got to preach on the blind man being healed yesterday in church because Lent 4, you often don't read it. And someone said at church, I thought this was very telling. I overheard this. It's a cracking story and very hilarious in points and shocking in others. And she turned to somebody. She said, "I don't think I've ever heard that story before." And there was a retired clergy sitting behind her. He went, "Well, that's because we never read it because it's always set for Mothering Sunday." And we always change the reading. So there we are.
But they are still reeling in Beaminster from your address on Sunday.
Which bit of it? Oh, the pronouns for God. It was a tiny little paragraph.
Oh, but that's what they've taken away from it, Jan.
Oh, dear.
I've heard all about it. I said, "Jolly good," because I would have done the same, I said.
There we are.
Good. At least they remembered something, which is good.
It's always good. Get to Thursday and they can still remember something you said on Sunday.
Yeah. But today we're going to approach that well-known bandaged man, Mr. Lazarus.
Oh, it always makes me laugh, this story, because it always reminds me of after school club when we bandaged everyone up with toilet rolls.
Yeah,
and then we shouted, "Lazarus, come out!" And they all went whoop through their toilet rolls.
It did.
Perhaps I'll do that on Sunday. I think I'm down to preach at Beaminster again. Perhaps I'll wrap you up in a loo roll and then say, Lazarus, come out. You can burst your bonds.
You could.
Okay, I think I have more enthusiasm for that idea than you do.
No, I've done it myself in the past. It'll rank alongside memorable sermons of Joe Neely with an arrow on the pillar the first year you were here. I seem to remember. Never mind Sooty and Sweep.
Should we have a pause?
I would, yeah.
So we're going to edit slightly the reading today because it is a long one. But if you want to read the whole thing, it's John 11, 1 to 45. But we're going to jump in at verse 17. When Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, some 2 miles away, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them about their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him while Mary stayed at home. Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died. But even now, I know that God will give you whatever you ask of him. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha said to him, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live, and everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? She said to him, yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one coming into the world. When he had said this, he went back and called her sister Mary and told her privately, the teacher is here and he's calling for you. And when she heard it, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come to the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. The Jews who were with her in the house, consoling her, saw Mary get up quickly and go out. They followed her because they thought she was going to the tomb to weep there. When Mary came where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said to him, Lord, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus saw her weeping and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. He said, where have you laid him? They said to him, Lord, come and see. Jesus began to weep. So the Jews said, see how he loved him. But some of them said, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? Then Jesus, again greatly disturbed, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. Jesus said, take away the stone. Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, Lord, already there is a stench because he has been dead for 4 days. Jesus said to her, did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? So they took away the stone. And Lazarus looked upwards and said, and Jesus looked upwards and said, Father, I thank you for having heard me. I know that you always hear me, but I have said this for the sake of the crowd standing here, so that they may believe that you sent me. When he had said this, he cried with a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. The dead man came out, his hands and feet bound with strips of cloth, and his face wrapped in a cloth. Jesus said to them, unbind him and let him go. Many of the Jews, therefore, who had come with Mary and had seen what Jesus did, believed in him.
Well, my first take, as often, comes in that very last verse. Many Jews who'd come with Mary had seen what Jesus did, believed in him. What would it take to believe in Jesus? What evidence do we need?
Yeah, raising someone from the dead is pretty good evidence, isn't it?
Can't argue with it.
Oh, I bet the scientists could today. He wasn't really dead, he was pretending. He was on life support. They didn't know how he was dead.
Well,
He didn't have to find death. He was really breathing. He was just in a coma.
Mm.
I don't think as a scientist you'd want to argue he was only pretending, would you?
You might want a more scientific explanation.
Sorry, was I going near the politician's route?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Boris Johnson would have said, couldn't bother if he dead. He was having a party. He didn't think he was a party. He was just pretending.
It was pretending to be a party. Interestingly, a little beaver, I had beavers visit church on Monday, said to me in the course of doing some craft activity, I don't believe that Jesus existed. And I said, well, it's interesting because we know that Jesus did exist. That's not what you're asked to believe. What you're asked to believe is whether he was God. But he definitely existed. He was a human being. We've got historical evidence that someone called Jesus lived and did those things around Galilee roughly at that time. So don't worry about believing whether he existed or not. Just think about whether you think he's God, which may have been too complex for a 6-year-old. But I just thought it's, yes. Clearly, we're not doing a good enough job in our school assemblies if our children are believing that whether the Jesus existed or not is up for debate. But there we are.
Now, we all have our own favourite bits of that story. Chris, you like and many people came to believe. I think, Joe, it's true to say you like the Martha statement.
Yeah, it's interesting. I will try and précis this because it's. I've done a bit of background reading this week. Unusually, there's some scholarly debate at the moment about whether Mary and Martha in this account in John are the same people as Mary and Martha in the Luke account of when they have that conversation about, why won't you get her to help me, the Mary and Martha bit. There's some discrepancy over whether they really lived in Bethany and whether Bethany was the place that's mentioned in Luke and probably wasn't. And then there's some interesting research going on at the moment about the earliest written manuscript of John's Gospel, which is about 200 Common Era, 200 AD. And there's some crossings out and some changes. And so there's a potential debate about whether this was actually, it wasn't Mary and Martha, it was just Mary. And it wasn't the same people. So Mary and Martha definitely existed, and they're in Luke's Gospel. But maybe this is Mary, sister of Lazarus, and in which case could be Mary Magdalene. So it's just interesting. But the point, and that's interesting in a scholarly way, and people are interested about whether things have been changed. But the thing that interested me is not just that, but it's the fact that whether Mary says it or Martha says it, what they do is they have a confession of faith in verse 27, which is very similar to the Peter confession of faith that happens in John's Gospel in chapter 6 and also happens in the Synoptics Gospels when Jesus says to Peter, "Who do you say I am?" And he says, "I believe that you are Messiah, the one coming into the world." And we often talk about that as the confession at Caesarea Philippi, and it's a turning point in the Gospels, in the Synoptic Gospels, because Peter is affirming kind of for the first time that he recognizes Jesus as the Messiah. And then that goes forward into Peter's life about Peter's confession and Peter being the rock that Jesus builds the church on. But what's interesting is that there's a feminine equivalent in John's Gospel. So that there's a woman being asked basically, do you believe this? And she says, "Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one coming into the world." So there's an equally transforming affirmation of faith recorded from a woman's mouth, a named woman, although we don't know whether she's Mary or Martha. And so that's been really intriguing me this week as I've been looking at this passage. And, that these professions of faith are really important. And the stories we've come through in Lent, through John's Gospel in this season of Lent, they've all been about people confessing or understanding Jesus as the Messiah. From Nicodemus, from the Samaritan woman at the well, the blind man healed last week, and now Mary and Martha and Lazarus and the witnesses. These are all about who is Jesus, and do people recognise him as the Messiah? There you go, lecture over.
Thank you very much. Now, dear viewer, I hope you've enjoyed that. It's time for us to go. We don't need to have any more. Our learned lecturer has given Chris and I a good lecture. We've taken notes, and we'll be done. I was going to say,
on Sunday.
We all have our favourite bits of this story. Chris liked the many believed. Joe, as you've just heard, that's thesis has got her theories. I was going to say when the dog shuts up, because Jane is talking outside the door and not whatever. Hang on a second, I'll belt the dog.
Maybe that was just Ro trying to tell us what her favourite bit of this story was.
No, she was agreeing with my favourite bit, because my favourite bit is you can't take the stone away because of his stink. Because, I mean, who would go to the, you're writing this story down, and you get to the point of, well, if you'd have been here and not delayed coming, well, it's something to do with the death and the resurrection story there, maybe, LinkedIn. That's my bit of theology, dear viewer. And you go to all this story about the arguments and the telling off that Jesus gets and all that's gone on. And then suddenly you get somebody who thinks, hang on a sec, we better make it a bit more dramatic. Don't take the stone away, there'll be a stink. He's been dead 3 days. And Jesus, as we know, says, take the stone away. We have to presume there wasn't a stink because no one fainted or fell over, and it's not mentioned ever again, is it?
No.
And so had he died, this is the scientific bit, Chris, you were saying, where the scientists could come in. If he'd been dead 3 days in the heat of those countries, he would have been smelling a bit by then. If he wasn't smelling, then he couldn't have been dead. Thus, he was pretending.
But surely your favourite bit of this story is your favourite theological word.
Yeah. Go on. Tell us what my favourite theological word is.
It's
I don't think we get away without it.
It's revivification.
I was trying not, because Chris always makes fun of me for saying this. But you see, it's quite interesting, because a few years ago, when we went on holiday to Crete, we were advised to go to a monastery, because they've got some beautiful icons at this monastery. We drove up way out in nowhere, a bit like the road you were telling us, that Roman road over to Powerstock, Chris. It was steep on all sides. But any Greek road, those who know Greek roads know there's nothing on the edge of them. You do fall off if you're not careful, and it's quite frightening. We got to the monastery, which wasn't a monastery really. It had been a retreat centre for Greek Orthodox trainee priests in its day. 100 odd rooms. There was one man living at it. He was the warden. But when we got there, he let us in very nicely and told us about some of the icons. But he directed us to the very important chapel. This was the chapel of the raising of Lazarus. And there were lots of icons around the walls of different attempts of wrapped toilet roll and people flying out of blankets. Quite ancient, 300-400-year-old, beautifully painted icons. But the purpose of that chapel was it was where the brothers or fathers or the trainee priests or whatever had been laid the night before their funeral.
Interesting.
So that they could come to resurrection with Christ through Lazarus.
Wonderful.
Oh, that ain't. So there's hope in this story for us all.
Absolutely. And it points, as you've rightly connected, it points to the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, which is a different thing. But this is kind of foreshadowing what's going to happen for Jesus.
What's potentially going to happen. And the 3 days are important, of course. Despite all the other theologies you can try and put into what happened in those 3 days, where he went, where he didn't go, whether he did this, that, or the other.
Well, it's just important in proving he's dead, isn't it?
Yeah.
That in this story, I think the whole thing about him delaying and the stink and all the evidence, it's trying to make sure people understand that Lazarus really was dead. There's lots of, proper evidence in this story that they would have considered evidence to say is proper dead. It's not just pretending.
I quite like that. We had that reminder from Chris yesterday.
We did, yeah.
He was dead. And Jesus rose him from the dead.
Yeah, like actually proper dead.
But being proper dead, we have to bear in mind he was brought back to the same body. That's the key.
Well, yes, and to have a future death.
Because he has to die again into new life with Christ.
I mean, I must say, we've only ever buried people that have been really dead, haven't we?
Generally.
As far as I'm aware. Yeah.
I've not buried anybody who's just nearly dead.
I've never lifted the lid on a coffin to check before I do the service. If that helps.
Oh, it goes into. But isn't that what they used to have, the little bell thing?
Yeah, some people did. In the churchyard where my grandparents are buried in Chester, which is a huge municipal cemetery, There was children used to walk along, and there was one with a bell going into a wire going into the ground. And my father did delight in telling us that, so if they woke up, they could ring the bell.
We perhaps ought to have a trigger warning at the beginning of this rev chat.
So the very fact of Lazarus' revivification is that, of course, he has to die again to new life with Christ.
Which is what we all have to do.
We do.
And actually, faith is about dying to self in a way, isn't it? And taking up our cross and living.
I think that's part of the key again of this reading, isn't it? It's leading us ever nearer to the Holy Week joy of Palm Sunday and all that goes on that week. And of course, as I've said many times, and no doubt will say again, you cannot have the joy and excitement of Easter Day without going through the utter devastation of Good Friday.
And I found the journey through Lent and these amazing people we've discovered. So these witnesses to who Jesus is, I found them so inspiring this year. The witnesses of very kind of ordinary people. Interestingly, such a range, from the Pharisee, Nicodemus the Pharisee, to the unnamed Samaritan woman, to the blind man, to the named women who are friends of Jesus, a real range of people who all have experiences that lead them to faith in Jesus Christ. And that's our experience, isn't it? We're all different. We've all had different experiences that have led us to our faith in Jesus Christ. And
of course, the doubting Thomas, again, to come in the story of Easter and whatever, because he says, let's go with him along this way so that we may die to live with him. I think, paraphrasing the words that he says. So lots to think about as we approach. And that story of Lazarus, every time we read it, you see something new to think on and to ponder on. Even if it is, a quick lecture, keeping the practice up before May. So that's good.
I'm sorry. If you want to read about it, I'll send Harry the link so you can read something about it. Maybe no one's that interested.
You could just write us a thesis and send it to us, and we'll print it. We'll stick it on the door of the churches or something. Aren't you meant to do that with theses? Stick them on the door of the churches.
I was just thinking about I'll read it out on Sunday. It'll save me writing one of my own.
Yeah.
So, anyway, it's lovely to see you both. Thank you for joining us for our Rev Chat. We'll see you again next week, hopefully with a special guest.
We could have a special guest, and it won't be the bishop because he doesn't want to come back and meet people in Chrissy's badge.
Right. Bless you all. See you soon.
And Thomas the Parkinson, affiliates, and all the rest of it. Bye-bye.